Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is Tuesday, the 6th of February, and today we'll be discussing part one of a two-part discussion on the 2024 elections across Africa. We'll release the second part of this discussion next week when we hold it. But the topic is the elections in Africa in 2024 and its implications for businesses. And today we're joined with Dr. Ramu, who's a senior analyst on our team, and Siddharthi Wasilwa, who is managing the Europe, Middle East, and Africa production. So this year we have elections in Senegal. Well, today we'll be discussing the elections in Senegal, South Africa, Burkina Faso, and Mali, and their implications for businesses and outlook and overview with our final thoughts. So to kick it off, Dr. Ramu, could you give us a lowdown of what's going on in Senegal with regards to the elections? I believe they're the closest elections at the moment.
Thanks, Uday. Yeah, the funny thing is Senegal elections, used to be, or it was the closest elections at the moment, but as things stand, the presidential elections were to be held on the 25th of February to succeed President Macky Sall, who has completed his third term as of now. However, on February 3rd, this Sunday, President Sall postponed the election indefinitely, citing a dispute over the list of presidential candidates. Prior to this development, 20 candidates had already been cleared by the Constitutional Council to run in the election. As obvious, some of the opposition and civil society groups have denounced this delay, as an institutional coup. Sall had previously amended the constitution to reduce a term's length from the initial 7 years to the current 5 years, and argued that it had reset his term limits. However, most legal experts have disagreed to his claims. And with the developments that have taken place and with the latest that have happened on February 3rd, these somewhat come in direct contravention to the presumed logic that Senegal is perhaps the only country in the coup belt, or the fascist belt of Western Africa, with a chance of a fair election in this year, in 2024.
Right.
Because, I mean, even when you look at history, I mean, they've had a free and fair election, relatively free and fair elections. It's been a very prosperous country. It's been mostly recognized as the barometer of democracy in that particular region. But at the same time, we must take into cognizance the fact that Senegal has seen just about 4 presidents since its independence from the French in 1960. So this is a kind of a dichotomous situation as far as I could see. And yeah, so let me just like give you a basic overview of the candidates, the major candidates who are participating in the elections that are due. So the leading candidates include the current Prime Minister, Amadou Ba, who is also handpicked as the preferred successor by President Sall himself. Then you have former Prime Minister Idrissa Seck, and then you have former Dakar, the capital Dakar's mayor Khalifa Sall. And obviously, you have the popular jailed opposition leader Ousmane Sonko, and also Karim Wade, who's the son of former President Abdoulaye Wade, who were deliberately excluded as candidates. So Ousmane Sonko is a radical figure in the political landscape of Senegal. His charisma and his fervor have always inspired the youth. I mean, like, and he has the capability to mobilize youth votes in his favor. But somehow or the other, he was implicated in different scandals. I mean, mostly cases which started with a sexual assault implication. In 2021, he was jailed, then he was later released, and again, he was implicated in other scandals like corruption related cases, and jailed once again. So in June 2023, the last major protest that happened in Senegal was about the re-imprisonment of Ousmane Sonko. But eventually, we are seeing that, I mean, he's now nowhere in the picture. I mean, he's still in prison. So this looks more of less like a stage managed election. Yeah, and
Right.
the official campaign period for the elections, it actually commenced on February 4th, although unofficial campaigns began quite early last month. But again, I mean, this is as far as the situation goes. Prior to what happened on February 3rd, when Saul actually said that the elections can be indefinitely postponed. Uh, the main campaign issues, include infrastructure development, the corruption scandals, which are mostly associated with the ruling regime of Sal, as well as unemployment, especially unemployment among the young populations and unemployment in the rural areas of Senegal, apart from big cities like Dakar or St. Louis, for example. Then you have a
So
kind of an okay, Uday, do you have
go ahead.
anything to add to it?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, would you argue that, given what you've said about the history of elections in Senegal and, what's been going on over the last few years, would you think that the elections would be a test of Senegal's democratic progress, given the crackdowns against the opposition, as you described, the media and the civil society, by the Sall-led government?
It's a tough question, but a broader context of the centrality of the election is the positive reputation of the Senegalese Electoral Commission. It has always been known for its independence and autonomy. And additionally, Senegal is in a region where military coups have occurred in the last 4 years. You have Guinea, you have Burkina Faso, you have Mali, and you have the latest in the dominoes. It's Niger. So compared to what has been happening in its very volatile neighborhood, there is still a lot of hope. And Senegal is also in a region where insurgent groups affiliated with both the Islamic State as well as the Al Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb region are expanding their influence. So
Right,
compared to what is happening in the neighborhood, yeah, it actually like speaks volumes about the prosperity and the stability, the political, socio-political stability of the country. So, yeah, I mean, despite the increasingly authoritarian attitude of President Macky Sall, there is still hope that, and there is still a basic assumption which holds true that Senegal is still considered as one of the most stable countries over there with a fair track record of democratic elections. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
right. That, go
and
ahead.
maybe just to chime in on what Rami you mentioned. I mean, based on what Uday also brought up, I mean, these elections will be a massive test for Senegal, especially the administration of President Macky Sall, whom, when you look at his track record as president, as much as the country has made some significant progress in terms of, big infrastructure projects and whatnot, the democratic space of Senegal has been shrinking over the last 3 or so years, clamping down on civil society groups, opposition political parties, and opposition leaders as well, has been a major, feature of President Macky Sall's rule. So that definitely indicates that these elections will taste the democratic progress or gains that Senegal has had over the last 2 or so decades. Yeah, back to you.
Right. Thanks a lot, Siddharthi, for that, and Ramu for the context that you provided. It was quite interesting. Let's move over to South Africa. Siddharthi, can you give us a quick summary of the elections that are supposed to be held in May and August? Between
Yeah,
May
I
and
mean
August.
thanks today. The date is yet to be set, I mean, and the general elections will be held between May and August, and voters will basically elect representatives of the National Assembly and 9 provincial legislatures. Thereafter, the members of the National Assembly will elect the president of South Africa. And an important thing to note here is that the ruling African National Congress Party has dominated elections in the country since the end of the apartheid regime in 1994. But ANC's dominance is gradually declining, going by the outcome of previous elections. Currently, most credible opinion polls indicate that the African National Congress Party may receive less than 50% of the total national vote for the first time in 3 decades. The waning influence of the African National Congress can be attributed to public disaffection against its inability to address issues such as corruption and the creation of jobs, as well as the improvement of the quality of public utility services, especially electricity. Opposition parties, especially the Democratic Alliance and the Economic Freedom Fighters, which are the leading opposition parties in the country, will be out to increase their numbers in the National Assembly and the provincial assemblies. They're expected to position themselves as alternatives for the African National Congress, given that the ruling party is also experiencing wrangles among its leaders. And a critical development to mention here is that recently, that's towards the end of January, the ANC suspended former president, who is also popular, that is Jacob Zuma, as a member of the party, following his declaration to support the newly formed Umkhonto Wesizwe Party in the upcoming elections. Umkhonto Wesizwe, by the way, means spear of the nation, and this name referred to a paramilitary wing of the ANC party during the apartheid era. So that sort of controversy has created, tensions in the party. Back to you.
Right.
Udi.
Okay, thanks a lot for that quick overview, Sitati. Let's just cover off on a couple countries that we mentioned in our discussion on the Islamic State last week, when we were talking about the Islamic State Khorasan province rising as one of the stronger affiliates. We also talked about the Islamic State in West Africa and touched on Al-Qaeda also. So Burkina Faso and Mali, Sitati, if you could give us a quick rundown on them also before we talk about the implications for businesses for each of these elections. So Burkina Faso and Mali both had coups last year, or delays in elections, right? So
Yes.
can you tell us what's going on there quickly?
Yeah, I mean, picking up from where you've left it, presidential elections were initially to be held this month in Mali and then late in July in Burkina Faso. But the military-led governments in both countries postponed the elections. And in the case of Mali, the government attributed the postponement to delays in the procurement of, election materials. On the other hand, the military regime in Burkina Faso said that insecurity demonstrated by the persisting threat of terrorism indeed influenced, the postponement of the elections. In Mali, it's also important to note that the threat of insurgency and the rebellion by the Tuareg rebel groups may also have led to the postponement of the elections, although the Malian military regime has not really hinted at this as being additional reasons for the postponement. But if you look at how issues have been panning out in the country, then definitely insecurity has been a major factor of the postponement of the elections. But this doesn't stop there. I mean, we had a constitutional referendum held in Mali last year. So one would wonder why election cannot really go ahead. While these regimes in Mali and Burkina Faso have valid reasons for rescheduling these elections, the transition elections, they may also be seeking to prolong their rule. Nonetheless, elections cannot be ruled out in Burkina Faso and Mali this year. But in the case of Burkina Faso, a constitutional referendum may precede transition elections. In Burkina Faso, it's also critical to mention that if it goes ahead to hold a referendum, then it will be following the footsteps of both Mali and Chad, where such referenda have been held before the transition elections. So Mali is only awaiting to have the presidential elections, probably depending on what the military regime is going to settle on. And in Chad, which we will be speaking extensively on next week, the referendum was held in December last year. So that's what we can close out for this discussion on Burkina Faso and Mali as we proceed to the next stage. Over to you, Uday.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sitati. So, guys, let's just talk about the implications for businesses. Of course, there are election-related risks in all these countries, such as violence, changes in government policies, the security environment, and protraction of the status quo with respect to governance challenges like systemic corruption. Ramu, if I can bring you back here, can you tell us what the main risks are in Senegal and what the outlook is, given that you said it is more stable than other places in its neighborhood, especially?
Thanks, Uday. Yeah, despite the stability, in Senegal, election-related violence cannot be ruled out, especially if the ruling party attempts to influence the outcome of the election. As we have seen, I mean, the ruling party has influenced the progress of the election itself. So it's quite possible that it can happen again. A regime change is unlikely to affect the overall orientation of the government policy. And this implies that Chinese influence and investment in the Senegalese economy are expected to continue. Similarly, a new administration is expected to remain favorable towards Western businesses. As you can see in the oil and gas interests in offshore Senegal and even near the maritime borders with Mauritania. Past and present Senegalese governments have maintained a pragmatic approach to government policy, and I feel this is expected to continue. Over to you, Dave.
Okay. So I mean, Burkina Faso and Mali are completely different ball game here. So Sitati, would you say that the risks in South Africa are similar to Senegal?
When you look at South Africa, of course, there are those fundamental differences. South Africa has a good, solid track record, for that matter, of low risk of election-related violence. That may not really change this time around again. And South Africa's electoral processes are way above board compared to most African countries. And with the ANC likely to dominate the general elections, this essentially implies that the status quo will prevail with regard to the overall government policy and governance issues, especially corruption. And I also think the key important factor to mention here is the fact that a new administration will also be under pressure to address load shedding, unemployment, which are two issues that could potentially result in civil unrest in the long term if they are not sufficiently addressed. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Sitati. If you could just quickly also cover off on the situation in Burkina Faso and Mali. This comes after the countries have kicked out the French. That has exacerbated the security environment, right? So
yeah, I mean, the military regimes in these countries are likely to pursue policies that are anti-French, as they have demonstrated over the last 2 or so years. And Western businesses should also be aware of the increasing Russian influence, which could potentially have an impact on the awarding of government contracts. As we have seen over the last 2-3 years, Russia has been scaling up its influence in Burkina Faso, sending in, obviously, Wagner mercenaries, and lately in Burkina Faso, sending in the Africa Corps, which is thought to be a rebranding of the Wagner group. So certainly, this is tailored towards strengthening Russia's interests, especially in the mining sector in the two countries. But overall, political instability in Burkina Faso and Mali may persist, mainly due to insecurity, which has been a major cause of military coups in these two countries. So back to you, Uday, for the final thoughts.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that, Dr. Ramu and Sitati. So we have at APAC Assistance done pre-election security risk assessments for countries in the region in Africa. So reach out to APAC Assistance for comprehensive and bespoke risk assessments for help in mitigating risks. Any last words from Ramu and Satati before we head off? And we'll have part 2 of this discussion talking about some other countries next week. Go ahead, gentlemen.
Nothing from my end, Uday.
Yeah, I don't also have anything from my end. So see you next week for part 2 of this discussion. Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate your time and
Thanks a
appreciate
lot.
everyone listening on this.